I'm going to talk to you this morning about what I'm pretty sure is going to be the most important and the most interesting century that Homo sapiens has ever had. I call it the Century of Two Singularities. Some of what I say to you this morning may, I'm hoping that this is coming on, some of what I say to you this morning may shock you. In fact, if it doesn't, I'm probably not doing my job right. But if and when you are shocked during this talk, please remember that although these singularities bear great risks, they also bear tremendous promise. If we navigate these two singularities well, our future, and the future of our children and our grandchildren, will be truly remarkably wonderful. This word singularity comes from maths and physics, where it denotes a point in a process where a variable becomes infinite. The classic example is a black hole. At the center of a black hole, mass becomes infinite. And what happens then is that the normal rules completely break down, and the future becomes extremely hard to foresee or to even understand. And so that's an analogy for what is going to happen in human events. And the word singularity was first applied to human events, to technology and to sociology, by this man, John von Neumann, who was a formidable genius and, among many other things, one of the fathers of modern computing. So it has a reasonable intellectual pedigree. And I say that because its most prominent advocate is this man, Ray Kurzweil. Can I just ask, gauging the audience by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Ray Kurzweil? A few, a minority, but a few. And how many of you actually read any Ray Kurzweil? Pretty much nobody. Okay, that's fine, that's fine. Ray Kurzweil is a genius. There's really no question about that. But he's astonishingly, relentlessly optimistic. He believes that in 2029, we will create a machine which is as clever as we are, and we will merge with it, and we will zoom off around the universe and live like gods. And he's utterly convinced this is going to happen, unshakably convinced, and he doesn't think anything can go wrong. Now, when I first read Ray Kurzweil's books, I thought that's really startlingly interesting, but surely there's a lot that could go wrong. There's more he needs to think about. The reason why he thinks that will happen is because of artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence has been in the news a lot lately, not least because of DeepMind, a London-based company now owned by Google, creating a machine which beat the world's best, probably best ever, player of the board game Go. That was in March, and I'm sure you all read about that. And it was the third of three great human versus machine championships. The first was in 1997, when IBM Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov at chess. Kasparov was probably the best ever human player of chess, and he was not a happy man. He thought IBM had cheated, and he was very gruntled. In, I think, 2011, another IBM machine, IBM Watson, beat a man called Ken Jennings at a quiz game called Jeopardy, not very, in fact, doesn't appear here, but very popular in the States. And Ken Jennings was much more gracious when he lost to IBM. He put up this little note saying, "I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords." DeepMind and AlphaGo beating Lee Sedol was a very significant step forward because it was a different type of AI that did it. Artificial intelligence is an overnight sensation which is 60 years old. It celebrated its 60th anniversary this year. It was born in Dartmouth College in Virginia 60 years ago. These are the founders, and this is them celebrating the 50th anniversary. Sadly, they can't celebrate this anniversary because all but one of them are dead. They've succumbed to a design flaw in humanity, which we really should do something about. And ever since its incarnation, artificial intelligence has had two forms. The most dominant form for almost all that time has been a thing called symbolic AI. It's what IBM Deep Blue used to beat Garry Kasparov. It's rigorously logical. The way IBM Deep Blue won was to simply calculate the likely moves going forward, calculating them much further ahead than any human could, assigning a value to each possible board outcome, and then simply making the move which maximized that value. Very straightforward, really. What has happened since is there's a new kind of artificial intelligence has come along. It's called machine learning, and its most powerful form is called deep learning. Excuse me. And Geoffrey Hinton, a British computer scientist who spent most of his career in North America, is really the father of deep learning, which is in many ways the rebirth of something that's been around for a long time called neural networks. They've been around since the 1960s, but they didn't work. They started working recently. And they started working because we got more powerful machines and we got more data. And big data is a big part of this story. It turns out that if you have rivers, oceans of data, and you feed them to very powerful machines, the neural networks, machine learning, becomes unreasonably effective. The reason why we've got more powerful machines is this bloke's fault. This is Gordon Moore. And in 1965, he was working for Fairchild Semiconductors, and he noticed that his company was packing twice as many transistors onto each chip every year, he thought it was at the time. It's gone through a series of iterations, and it boils down to this. Every 18 months, a computer gets twice as powerful. £1,000 worth of computer gets twice as powerful. So that gives you exponential growth. Now, as you're all investors, you're all highly numerate, and you know what exponential growth looks like. It looks like this, the exponential growth with a factor of 2. It looks like the past was pretty dull, the present is getting interesting, and the future is absolutely astonishing. And it always looks like that. Wherever you are on the curve, you always think you're at the knee. This is a chart of the number of transistors on Intel chips over the years. Now, if you only remember one sentence from today, from this talk, please remember that exponential growth is driving the two singularities. That's the thing you really need to hang on to, because exponential growth is formidably powerful. As a little analogy or a little illustration, if we took 30 steps out of that door, we would travel 30 meters or so. If we could take 30 exponential steps, so that our first step was 1 meter, our second step was 2, our third was 4, our fourth was 8, and so on, it would take us to the moon. In fact, that's not quite right. The 29th step would take us to the moon. The 30th step would bring us all the way back again. That is the power of exponential growth, and that is the growth that computers are going through, including artificial intelligence. These machines are getting very, very good at pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is what we do. Pattern recognition is our great cognitive skill. So these machines are already better at recognizing images, faces and other images, than you are. They are in the process of overtaking you in speech recognition. They're not there yet, but they're very close. And they're catching up fast in natural language programming. The time is going to come when these machines are much better than you at all of these things. And really what I'm talking about today is what happens then. So in the next few years, next 5, maybe 10 years, what's going to happen? Firstly, I think Siri is going to get serious, because at the moment Siri is a bit of a joke. It's good fun, it's a bit of a joke. But in 5 or 10 years, you're going to have conversations with Siri. It's going to be a companion. It's going to be your errand boy or errand girl, and you'll send it off to do things for you. It'll be an invaluable assistant for you. I think it's going to be quite a while before anybody falls in love with them, as Theo does in the movie Her. And as a little aside, by the way, you may feel that science fiction is becoming science fact, and you're right, it is. So it's not a bad idea to get to grips with science fiction, because it's quite a good guide to some of the things that might happen in the future. I think the movie Her is Hollywood's best effort at a movie about artificial intelligence. Now, that isn't setting the bar very high, but I think it's well worth watching. That and Transcendence I would recommend as your homework. One of the interesting things about these digital assistants like Siri, Cortana, Google Now, or whatever Google's calling it today, is we don't know what we're going to call them yet. I think Apple has probably lost the opportunity to make Siri the Hoover of digital assistants, so maybe we'll call them our friends. Another thing which you can already see and is going to get very, very common and important over the next decade is self-driving cars. You can already get a lift in a self-driving taxi in Pittsburgh and in Singapore. You get in, there is no driver. There are 2 people in the front seat to make sure nothing goes wrong, but there is no driver, and it will navigate you from A to B. There are trucks there's a truck which has delivered a crate of beer flawlessly, sorry, not one crate of beer, a consignment of beer in the States. There are self-driving buses in Greece and in Norway and in Helsinki. But these are just trials. But by the turn of the century, self-driving cars are going to become quite common. And that's a very good thing, because at the moment, Humans kill 1.2 million people every year by driving cars. We are sending humans to do a machine's job. Self-driving vehicles will not kill people on that scale. Not only do we kill 1.2 million, we seriously injure another 20 to 50 million every year. It's a carnage out there, and we should stop it. And once again, we don't actually have a word for these things yet. They're not going to be called self-driving cars. That's far too clunky. I like to think we'll call them autos. Now, that's the near term, in my language anyway. Further ahead, I think we're going to get two singularities this century, and I think they are the most important changes that humanity's ever gone through. They are not the fourth industrial revolution. If anybody says the fourth industrial revolution to you, please rap them over the knuckles with a ruler. These are part of the information revolution. So the industrial revolution started in 1712 in this country with Newcomen's steam engine. The information revolution probably started in 1959, at least I like to think so, because that's the year I was born. And it's overlapping the industrial revolution, but it's going to be far more transformative than the industrial revolution. So let's start with the technological singularity, which is the one that's further away, and we'll start with it because it's more important. You can tell I used to be a strategy consultant because of the 2x2 matrix. The technological singularity is more important, but less urgent, and the economic singularity, which I'll come on to, is more urgent and not so important because it probably won't kill us. So, the technological singularity is when we create an artificial general intelligence. All the AI that we have now is artificial narrow intelligence. It may be superhuman in one particular area, like playing Go or chess, but it can't tie its shoelaces, it couldn't get in and out of this room, and it doesn't even know that it's playing chess. It's very narrow, it's very domain specific. But in some years, we will create a machine which has all the cognitive abilities of an adult human. And when we do, it will carry on improving. Because the thing about computers is that they get twice as good every 18 months, and we don't. It's very hard to rewire a human brain. We've got 3.5 pounds of goop stuck inside our skulls. We can't grow it, we can't rewire it. You can do those things with a machine. So it will quickly go from being artificial general intelligence to being a superintelligence. Now, at this point, probably half of you are thinking, the guy's crazy. Why should we think this is going to happen? It's ridiculous. There are two ways that it could happen. It'll probably happen in both ways, but there are two ways that it could happen. One is we keep developing, we keep improving the AI systems that we have, and eventually you end up with an AGI, and that's entirely plausible and probably will happen. But there's another route to superintelligence or to AGI, which is almost bound to work, unless there's something magical, and I mean Harry Potter magical going on in here. And that is, you take a human brain, probably one that its owner has stopped using, you slice it really thinly, you scan all those slices, and you work out something called the connectome. That's the wiring diagram of a human brain. So where all the neurons go, where all the 86 billion neurons go, and all their 1,000 connections to all the other neurons. And then you monitor other human brains, which the owners haven't stopped using, and you work out how all the neurons work together, and then you make a model in a machine of this brain, and you fire it up. And if you make the model accurate enough, which we will because our processing power is getting much more powerful, our scanning power is getting much more powerful, if you model it close enough, it will do braining. It will do what a brain does, and what a brain does is it creates a mind. And then you can expand it and speed it up. So it seems almost impossible that we will not create superintelligence. Now, nobody was thinking about this very much, except for Ray Kurzweil and a few other people, until Nick Bostrom, who's a professor of philosophy at Oxford, wrote a book called Superintelligence. He wrote this in 2014. And that was read by the three wise men. And we had the three wise men moment at the end of 2014, when Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates all said the same thing. They all said, superintelligence is probably coming, and it's either going to be the best thing or the worst thing that has ever happened to humanity. And I think they were absolutely right. They got a lot of attention with these comments, but all that the media heard was the downside, because generally speaking, if it bleeds, it leads, and good news is not news. And this is such a brilliant picture. Why wouldn't you want to run lots of versions of this picture? So for a year or two, we had nothing but pictures of the Terminator through the newspapers, which was a bit of a problem because people like Google got really annoyed. You know, their life work was being portrayed as exterminating the species, and so they stopped talking about artificial intelligence in public. The Terminator, the Skynet scenario isn't really the danger. It's not impossible, but it's not really the danger. The danger is that the AI, the superintelligence, is overly competent and it doesn't have high enough regard for our interests. It just kind of ignores them or doesn't think we're important enough. So it's irritating like Clippy, but much more irritating because it's a superintelligence. Or it just says, I don't love you and I don't hate you, but I've got better uses for the atoms that you're made of. That's the downside. This is the upside. So DeepMind, this rather wonderful British company now owned by Google, has a two-step mission plan for humanity, and I think this is brilliant. Step 1, solve intelligence. Solve artificial general intelligence, create superintelligence. Step 2, use that to solve everything else. And by everything else, they mean really everything else. Poverty, war, death. So here's a thought. This is a room full of spring chickens like me. We, or our children, or our children's children, may turn out to be the last generation of humans that don't have to die. Now, you say that to an audience of English people, and they go, oh my God, I don't want to live forever. What a dreadful thought. You say that to an audience of Americans, and they go, yeah! The difference is I think the Americans quickly get the fact that I'm not talking about living forever in, who was that Greek character? Was it Tiresias, who just got older and older and older because he forgot to wish for youth as well? I'm talking about living at the age you want to live. So these are the sorts of things that superintelligence might give us. This is why I say that the promise of AI is really enormous, as well as the risks being very significant. One thing is clear, we cannot stop this happening. Relinquishment is not an option. And there's various reasons for that. One is, if we wanted to stop this process, we wouldn't know what to stop. We don't know which bits of research will lead to artificial general intelligence. We know some things. You don't model human brains in computers. You don't do that if you don't want to create an AGI. But the work that's going on in machine learning, a lot of it doesn't look anything like artificial general intelligence research, but it might turn out to be. So we wouldn't know what research to stop. The other thing is the benefit of having a better AI than the next person, than the next organization, is overwhelmingly powerful. For any company, government, and above all military, it really is a life and death issue. If the other person has better AI, they win, whatever the competition is. So we cannot stop the progress of AI. And actually we shouldn't, because it will deliver such great benefits, assuming we navigate the singularities well. Now, there is a ton of money being thrown at AI research. These 6 tech giants in America are increasingly all AI companies. Microsoft did quite a visible pivot this year and became an AI company. It wasn't before. And between them, these companies spend more on R&D than the UK does. And when I say the UK, I mean everything in the UK. Every company, the government, academia, the whole lot. These companies spend more on R&D than we do. And here are 3 tech giants in China. The ABC of China, Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent. Baidu is China's Google, Alibaba is China's Amazon, and Tencent is a big telecoms company. And here's the list of big tech giants, AI tech giants in Europe. We haven't got any. And actually, I think that's a serious problem, as I'll come back to later on. What we really need to do with regard to superintelligence, with regard to the technological singularities, we need to make sure that the first superintelligence really, really likes us. Once it arrives, we probably can't control it. How do you control something which has become 1,000 times cleverer than you are, 1,000,000 times cleverer than you are? You can't. So we have to set it up so that it starts out really liking us. Unfortunately, there are some very, very bright people who are now increasingly well-funded working on this problem. 2 of them are exactly where you'd expect to find them, in the States, one in California and one near Boston. And rather wonderfully, the other 2 are in the UK, one in Oxford and one in Cambridge. So we are taking this problem seriously. We've got a couple of generations to get it right, probably. Nobody really knows how long it will take to build the first AGI, but it's probably a couple of generations. So we're working on this problem, and that's a good thing. And just this year, Google has come out of hiding. They've gotten over their annoyance about the Terminator, and they formed this organization along with Microsoft and all the other tech giants to talk relatively openly about the safety issues around AI. They recognize it and they're dealing with it. So that's all good. And if you want to read more about that, I highly recommend this book for reasons that you can probably imagine. So the economic singularity, which I say is less important because if we get the technological singularity wrong, it will probably make us go extinct. With the economic singularity, we'll probably not go extinct. We'll probably just be thrown back to the Middle Ages or something mild like that. But it's coming much sooner. I think 20 to 40 years. And it's about automation, which is not new. Automation has been with us for a very long time. In about 1600, Queen Elizabeth I refused a patent to a man called William Lee, who had invented a way of semi-automating the production of stockings, which was a really big deal in those days. And she said, I'm not going to give you a patent, because if I do, you will make some of my citizens, some of my subjects, unemployable, and I can't allow that. Which was very foresighted of her. However, we have had lots of automation. The Industrial Revolution was really about the automation of our physical ability. That's essentially what it was. And agriculture is the poster child. So in 1800, about 80% of all American workers worked on farms. By 1900, that was down to about 40%, and by 2000, it was down to below 2%. Now, that wasn't a massive problem for the humans. It was a jolting transition for a lot of them, but humans had something other than their muscle power to offer. They had their cognitive abilities. So the grandchildren of those people who worked as laborers on farms are now user experience architects or call center operatives. They've got their cognitive skills to offer. The automation of agriculture didn't work out so well for the horse, because the horse didn't have anything else to offer other than its muscle power. So in 1900, there were about 25 million horses working on American farms, and now there are pretty much none. So 1900 was peak horse in the workplace. The question now is, are we nearing peak human in the workplace? This is a slide from a study by a couple of Oxford academics. It's an interesting piece of work, this. It's a funny melange of academic rigor and sheer guesswork and real precision and utter vagueness. But it's as good as anybody's been able to do, and it's, you know, we are gazing into a glass darkly. They think that around about half of all American jobs will be taken over by machines in about 20 years. It's clear that machines do have very unfair advantages over us. When a machine can do your job, it will, because machines can do things cheaper, better, and faster than we can. They don't go to sleep. They don't get tired. They don't get cranky. They don't fall out with each other. They don't get drunk. They don't turn up late. They don't go home at night. So they've got seriously unfair advantage over us. We have had some cognitive automation in the past. In 1978, the states that are blue in this chart, the most common job in those states was secretary. And that's a cognitive job which has been eliminated by computers. So now there aren't secretaries, really. One state still has secretaries as its most common job. In the States, most states, the most common job now is truck driver. And that's a very interesting job, because that is blue-collar people earning a white-collar salary. And when when self-driving trucks and vans and cars are widely available, those people are going to be out of a job. What are they going to do next? Now, I think this is probably going to happen quite quickly, because we're going to have all the major marques, all the major brands will have self-driving vehicles out by the turn of the decade. And if you can replace the driver, you save 25 to 30% of the cost of running the vehicle. And you can run it 24 hours a day. So why wouldn't you? The answer is, of course you will, because if you don't, the person who does is going to put you out of business. So within a decade, I think most commercial vehicles will be self-driving. These people are all going to be out of work. In the States, there's 5 million of them. And then there's another 3 million whose jobs directly depend on those 5 million. In the UK, there's about 1 million of them. They're all going to be out of work. They're all going to be grumpy. They will probably find other jobs which will pay them half as well, and they won't be as much fun. What we have just seen in America and Britain is people voting against globalization. It is just a drop in the ocean compared to how people will feel if we don't make the transition to automation successfully. It isn't just truck drivers. There was a test done recently with a fully automated surgical robot, which did an operation on a pig's bladder, and the same operation was done on a different pig's bladder by a team of humans, and the robot did it better. It did it more slowly, but it did it better. And of course, the machines are getting twice as good every 18 months. IBM Watson can diagnose cancer looking at X-rays and photos better than human doctors can. Interestingly, the cutting edge of AI in the professions is lawyers. Who'd have thought it? A lot of what lawyers do is being automated. All that reading through acres of documents during the discovery and disclosure process, which is so dear to the people in the front row here, that's increasingly done by machines. There are thousands and thousands of articles written in the newspapers every day, or published in the newspapers every day, written by machines, particularly sports and financial reports. And robots in factories are getting much cheaper and much safer. This is a fellow called Sawyer. He's got a big brother called Baxter. They cost about £25,000 each, $25,000 each, and they're very flexible. They can tell when there's a human nearby, and they don't just knock their head off. So they are taking over a lot of the work in factories and warehouses. Now, any economist among you is already thinking, this is all rubbish. This is the Luddite fallacy. We've had automation, as he said, we've had automation for centuries, and it hasn't created lasting unemployment. That's not what automation does. It creates more wealth, which creates more jobs. And that's absolutely true. That is what has happened in the past. But as we all know, what happened in the past isn't a sure guide, a necessary guide to what's going to happen in the future. And my contention is that this time it's different, because this time the machines are coming for our cognitive jobs. This is cognitive automation. So the economists have three particular kind of lines of defense that they rank up against the idea of cognitive automation. Firstly, they say we will work more closely with machines. Machines have their role, we have our role, we're emotional, we do pattern recognition better than they do, and we'll always have a role. I just think that's wrong, because I think the human part is increasingly going to be taken over by more and more capable machines. Well before we get to artificial general intelligence, machines will be doing all the things that most humans, maybe not everybody, but most humans could do for a living. So then the economists say, well, we can all do caring jobs, because machines don't care, they don't have empathy, so we'll make better nurses and doctors than the machines. Well, two things. Firstly, it turns out that humans quite like being looked after by machines, because machines don't get bored, they don't get testy. You can tell a machine the same joke 1,000,000 times a day and it just doesn't care. And also, many of us are not really suited. I'm certainly not really suited to being a nurse. So I'm not sure that you can really build an economy on that. The final line of resistance of the economist is the claim that we'll create new kinds of jobs. Now, maybe this is true. Maybe our grandchildren will be doing jobs which are just as hard for us to imagine as the web designer job would have been for the chap working, or the woman working on the farm 100 years ago. It's not borne out by history. If you do an analysis of the Bureau of Labor Statistics jobs in America today and compare it with jobs in 1900, 80% of all the job titles are pretty much the same. They're pretty much jobs which existed in 1900. 90% of the people doing jobs are doing jobs which existed in 1900. They look a bit different, but they're doing the same job. So we haven't in the past created lots of new kinds of jobs. Who's to say we will in the future? So I think we have to bite the bullet. And it amazes me how few people are doing this. The economists are all completely in denial. They're all saying, it's the Luddite fallacy, you're forgetting about the law of comparative advantage, it's the lump of labour fallacy, blah, blah, blah. So they're all stuck. But also a lot of the people who've written about automation, about cognitive automation, they kind of get to this point and then they do a swerve. They aim off because the conclusion is rather scary. And they say, tell you what, let's improve the education system. We'll all get much better at training and retraining, and we'll end up doing deep learning programming, perhaps. And I'd be interested to see how many of those 5 million truck drivers are going to be deep learning programmers in 10 or 15 years. I think we have to bite the bullet. I think we have to accept that in a generation or so, most people are going to be unemployable. And then we can liberate ourselves to realize this could be great. We could end up in a world where machines do all the boring stuff. Machines are washer-uppers and accountants and actuaries and road diggers. I mean, do we really believe that those things are the defining characteristic of humanity? Wouldn't it be great to live in a world where machines do the jobs and we do the important things, which are playing and exploring and learning and having fun and socializing? And I think this is possible. It's not easy, though, and it won't happen automatically. And if you want to read about it more, then I recommend that book. Here are 3 of the hurdles that we have to get over to achieve that wonderful world, that wonderful post-jobs world. The first one is we need, obviously, to find a way to pay everybody if they're not working for a living. And the usual answer, and it's not a silly answer, is universal basic income. If and when we get to the point where a quarter, a half of the population cannot work, cannot earn an income, What do? Do we let them starve? No, obviously we don't let them starve. We generate an income for them, and it's going to be called a universal basic income because it's for everybody. You get it by just being a citizen. It's basic in the sense it's enough to live on, and not just a life of penury, but a life of reasonable middle-class comfort. There's a lot of talk about universal basic income now, and the political left thinks we should have it now. So here's Bernie talking about universal basic income. What do you think? Do you think the Americans voted for a Ku Klux Klan-backed, misogynistic, narcissistic bully because they couldn't bear to vote for a woman? Do you think if it had been Bernie, they would have voted for him? I really hope not. But anyway, Bernie's wrong about universal basic income. If any country introduced universal basic income now, they'd hear a giant sucking sound as all the rich people left and all the poor people arrived. We don't have the right economy now for universal basic income. And I labour that point slightly because what I'm going to go on to say is going to make me sound like a rabid socialist, which I promise you I'm not. As Malcolm said, I spent 30 years in business before becoming a full-time writer and speaker about artificial intelligence. I know about, as well as about Moore's law, I also know about Murphy's law and Parkinson's law and Amara's law and Sod's law. I know that things don't roll out as well as easily as they should. I don't believe in a fairyland past world of great equality which capitalism has undermined and stolen from us. Capitalism is the engine, together with the scientific revolution, of making now the best time ever to be a human. So Bernie's wrong about universal basic income. It shouldn't be introduced now, but we're probably going to have it if and when most people become unemployable. And we don't know how soon that's going to be. The second thing that people worry about is meaning. How will we all find meaning in our lives if we don't have jobs? I personally don't think this is a major problem, and I think you guys are probably, many of you, the perfect case study to show why it isn't a big problem. I live in a town in Sussex where there's a lot of retired people, and I'm one of them, and we all rush around like mad things, and we have no idea how we managed to fit a job in before. So I think people can find useful things to do when they don't work. And aristocrats are the other group that show that a life without a job can have lots of meaning in it and not be boring. Aristocrats, you may love them or hate them, but they didn't all die of existential despair because of nothing to do. The really, really big threat is this one. In a world where a small number of people own most of the AI, they therefore own pretty much everything else because AI is the source of all the value. They not only have staggering levels of inequality, but something worse happens. Technology doesn't stop accelerating. So every year, every month, every week, shattering new developments are unveiled which improve our cognitive and physical performance. And the people who have the most assets get privileged access to them. And they will probably speciate. They will probably become a separate species. And what we know from history, as well as from science fiction, is that doesn't tend to work out too well. I think we probably need to avoid that situation. It's some decades off. I suspect the answer, and I really hated to arrive at this conclusion, I suspect the answer is that capitalism won't work anymore. I think private property is going to be dangerous, and we may need to put the AI into some form of public ownership, not state ownership, because we know where that goes, but maybe a public ownership mediated by the blockchain. Now, I admit I haven't developed my thinking on this very far, and it's pretty scary stuff, but it's a bit of a way off. There are clear possibilities of social collapse during these transitions if we don't get this right. And something that is worrying me a little bit is that some of this might start to happen fairly soon. Imagine it's 2025, 9 years from now. Half of those 5 million truck drivers in the States are unemployed. 500,000 are unemployed over here. And doctors, lawyers, accountants, factory workers, warehouse workers are also seeing AI encroaching on their domains. And they're thinking, those truck drivers, that's me in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, I don't know how long. I better do something about it. I better have some cash in case the worst happens. So I'm going to sell my house. And I better do it quickly because everybody else is going to catch on to this idea. And of course, everybody else has already caught on to this idea. Maybe 2025 will see the worst house price crash we've ever seen. It may well not, I don't know. There's just one possible scenario. These are the sorts of things we should be thinking about. We are a pretty smart little mammal. and there's 7 billion of us. There's about, I think it's about 3 billion online, and the rest are coming online rapidly. So we can solve this problem. We solve the hole in the ozone layer, we can solve this problem. We have a bit of time to solve it, but we don't have time to waste. And at the moment, one of our biggest problems is that the economists are all guilty of the reverse Luddite fallacy. They believe that because automation didn't cause lasting unemployment in the past, it can't in the future. Now, they might be right. You know, maybe something magical will happen and we will discover all sorts of interesting new jobs that for some reason the machines can never do. I don't see what that could be, but maybe they will. But to deny the possibility of widespread cognitive automation seems to me to be dangerous, and I call it the reverse Luddite fallacy. The next two generations are the generations that will have to navigate these singularities for us, and they're incredibly well named. Generation Y is the millennials, born after 1980, and they're going to be, in their prime, they're going to be the most influential people when we navigate the economic singularity. And one of the questions they're going to have to solve is, what are we for? Why are we here? So Generation Y, get it? The next generation, which doesn't have a name like millennials yet, born after 2000, is Generation Z. And they're going to have to deal with the technological singularity, with superintelligence. And let's hope they're not well named in that respect. But whatever, these two generations are going to do the most important and the most interesting and the most exciting job that humanity has ever done in navigating these two singularities. So we need to give them the best start in life that we possibly can. I have a 16-year-old son, and I am full of excitement and also anxiety about his future world. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. Thank you.